My parents said I was supposed to be theirs. 2 years later, they're crying into my voicemail. My mom ripped my phone out of my hand so hard it nearly sprained my wrist, then started going through my texts right in front of me. When I tried to grab it back, she shoved me away. When I stood frozen, she stared at me and said, "You were supposed to be ours." I didn't say a word. That was 2 years ago. Yesterday, I got a voicemail of them crying so hard I couldn't understand a word. The sound of their broken sobs echoed in my ears long after I deleted the message, a strange mixture of vindication and emptiness washing over me. Ever since I was a child, I knew there was something off about my family, especially my parents. I was 7 when I noticed them staring at me in a swimsuit for the first time. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it made me feel uncomfortable. The way their eyes lingered made my skin crawl, an instinctive reaction that I couldn't explain but knew enough to trust. I did everything I could to put distance between us. Whenever one parent left us alone with the other, I'd sit as far away as possible. In the car, I always insisted on sitting behind the driver instead of in the passenger seat, claiming it made me carsick. Those small acts of resistance were my only defense, my only way of establishing boundaries they seemed determined to ignore. My plan worked until I turned 14 and hit puberty. That's when my parents and I actually started getting close again. They bought me things and gave me my own space. My mother started asking about my day, sitting on the edge of my bed at night, her voice soft and her eyes searching mine for connection. My other parent began inviting me on weekend drives, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories from their youth. They brought home my favorite foods without being asked and remembered small details about my friends that surprised me. The change was so dramatic it left me dizzy, unsure what to believe about our history together. This went on for a year, long enough to make me believe they were just overprotective when I was younger. Perhaps I had misinterpreted their intentions, I thought. Perhaps they were just awkward, unsure how to parent properly. I wrote long entries in my journal analyzing every interaction, desperate to believe this new version of my family was the real one. The possibility that I had been wrong all along was strangely comforting. It meant there was nothing sinister about my childhood, just misunderstood love. We spent all our time together. They were the only adults who didn't make me feel alone in the world. They listened to me about everything and always knew what to say to cheer me up, until I got a boyfriend. That's when everything changed. It was as though a switch had been flipped, revealing that the kindness had been conditional all along. At first, my parents pretended to be supportive. They cracked awkward jokes, ruffled my hair, said things like our little kids growing up. I smiled and laughed along because I wanted so badly to believe they were normal, to believe I hadn't wasted a year convincing myself they were safe. The desire for a normal family had clouded my judgment, made me ignore the warning signs that were still there if I had only looked closely enough. But then came the small punishments, canceled movie nights, being too busy for our drives, giving short cold replies when I tried to talk about school or friends. The temperature in our home seemed to drop by degrees, their warmth receding like a tide that had only ever been temporary. I was texting my boyfriend in the hallway when my mom walked past and grabbed my phone so hard it nearly sprained my wrist. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she hissed. I froze. I had never seen her like this before. She aggressively went through all our texts right in front of me, her face contorting with each message she read, as though my normal teenage interactions were somehow a betrayal. When I tried to grab it back, she shoved me off. Not enough to throw me across the room, but enough to make it clear, the kindness had never been unconditional. It had always been about control, about possession, about ownership. When she finished reading, she just stood there, silent, staring at me. For a second, I almost thought she was about to cry, and then she said it, the sentence that killed whatever was left of the little kid who wanted to believe they were safe. "You were supposed to be ours." My blood went cold. I knew I had to leave. But since I didn't trust my other relatives, I had to be subtle. I called my aunt on my mom's side, asking if I could visit. My hands trembled as I packed a small bag, trying to make it seem like a casual weekend trip rather than an escape. That's how I spent my evening on a 3-hour bus ride, wondering whether my parents were truly, well, you know. The landscape blurred past the window as my mind raced, considering possibilities too disturbing to fully articulate. When my aunt opened her door, my life changed forever. She was smiling so hard her face was practically beaming. "Daisy, come here." Her hug was so genuine it almost erased all my painful thoughts. Almost. As soon as we got inside, I started crying. I wasn't planning to tell her anything, but she stroked my hair and said, "I know about your parents, honey." This made me cry harder, but I knew I had come to the right place. Her words were like permission to finally acknowledge what I had suspected for years. That week was the first time in years I actually felt safe. Every night she tucked me in and gave me a dream catcher for my nightmares. Every morning, she taught me how to meditate and regulate my emotions. It was the first time I didn't feel like a prize someone was trying to claim. The routine was comforting, a structure built on respect rather than possession. Little did I know, that week was the calm before the storm. The next day, she handed me a help-wanted flyer for a job at a local retirement home. I told her I appreciated it but was too busy with school to work. She went completely silent and left, the abrupt shift in her demeanor sending a chill down my spine. It was like watching a mask slip, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. The next morning, everything felt off. She was smiling, but her eyes were cold. You know, she said casually, your parents keep calling. They miss you so much. My mouth went dry. But I'm sure you don't want them to know what we talked about, do you? I can only imagine what your grandparents would say. Your cousins, your friends. The threat hung in the air between us, unspoken but unmistakable. I felt tears welling up. That's when she handed me the flyer again. I wanted to scream, but instead, I took it, plastered on a smile, and said, of course, I'll take the job. She smiled, thinking she had won. Her expression of triumph made something harden inside me, a seed of resistance taking root. If there's one thing my parents taught me, it's to always hide your intentions. So when she demanded 70% of my paycheck, I agreed. When she blackmailed me into cleaning her house every weekend, I agreed. Not because I was a pushover, but because I was playing the long game. Each yes was strategic, each compliance a step in a plan forming in the darkest corners of my mind. My first step was to document everything. I kept a secret journal of every demand, every insult, and every penny she took. I hid it inside a hollowed-out math textbook nobody would touch. The pages filled quickly, a growing testament to her exploitation, a record that would eventually become a weapon. My parents weren't any better. When I called that first weekend, my mom asked if I was being grateful to Aunt Susan for the opportunity. My other parent reminded me that family helps family, and I should stop complaining about the cleaning and money. They didn't ask if I was okay or how school was going. They just wanted me to keep Aunt Susan happy. Their indifference cut deeper than her cruelty, confirming that I was truly on my own. At school, I joined the computer club and befriended Jamie, a quiet tech whiz. I mentioned my situation, and Jamie taught me how to set up hidden cameras. I bought 3 with my own money, the 30% Aunt Susan let me keep. We spent hours after school testing them, making sure they were undetectable, Jamie's expertise becoming an unexpected lifeline. I placed them strategically, living room, kitchen, front door. They caught everything, Aunt Susan bringing home different men, bad-mouthing my parents, calling them those idiots who dumped their problem child on her, going through my backpack, and telling her friend Barbara she was milking this babysitting gig for all it's worth while using my money for online shopping. The camera footage was like looking through a window into her true self, a self she never intended me to see. I saved every video to a secure cloud account Jamie helped me set up. Evidence was piling up, but I wasn't ready to use it. Patience had become my shield and my weapon, each day of waiting sharpening my resolve. Phase 2 started on Aunt Susan's birthday. I baked her favorite cake and bought her a nice bracelet. The bracelet was silver with small blue stones that matched her eyes, not expensive, but thoughtful enough to seem genuine. I spent hours in the kitchen perfecting the chocolate ganache she loved, making sure the layers were even and the frosting smooth. The domesticity of the task was almost comforting, like playing a role in a movie about normal families. When I presented both gifts with a shy smile, her momentary confusion was quickly replaced by pleasure. She clearly hadn't expected such gestures from me, the ungrateful niece who had been so resistant to her generosity. She seemed surprised, and that's when I suggested I could help manage her finances since I was good at math. You know, I said casually, stirring my tea, I've been getting really good at budgeting my allowance from work. My economics teacher says I have a knack for numbers. She laughed at first, the sound dismissive and slightly condescending. Honey, adult finances are a bit more complicated than your pocket money. But I persisted, showing her how I could track her expenses. I could set up a spreadsheet for you, I offered. Nothing fancy, just something to help you keep everything organized. No charge. I added the last part with a small smile, making it seem like I was teasing about the money she took from me. The spreadsheet I created was detailed and professional, my meticulous nature turned to my advantage. Eventually, she agreed, mostly because she was lazy. That's when I discovered she was deeply in debt, maxed out credit cards, late car payments, even a second mortgage on her house. No wonder she wanted my paycheck, she was drowning financially. Each new discovery was a puzzle piece, helping me understand the full picture of her desperation. I started phase 3 by being even more helpful, picking up mail, sorting bills, cleaning the entire house, cooking dinner. Aunt Susan was thrilled with how mature I was becoming. My parents called to say how proud they were. None of them realized I was gathering information with every bill I opened, every drawer I organized, every conversation I overheard. My helpfulness was the perfect cover, allowing me access to areas of her life she would otherwise keep private. By month 3, I had enough dirt to bury Aunt Susan, but I still wasn't ready. The perfect opportunity came when she mentioned her boss, Mr. Michael, was coming for dinner to discuss her potential promotion. She was nervous and asked for my help. The timing couldn't have been better, an opening I couldn't have planned if I tried. I cleaned until the house sparkled, prepared an amazing meal, and set the table with her good china. When Mr. Michael arrived, I was polite and charming, then excused myself to study. Instead, I monitored the hidden camera feed on my laptop, watching the scene unfold like a director behind the scenes. Aunt Susan took credit for the clean house and delicious meal, claiming she'd been mentoring me into a responsible young adult. That's when my plan kicked in. I had placed an envelope labeled Susan's financial records on the coffee table, positioned within view of the dining room. The placement was deliberate, a trap set with precision. Mr. Michael noticed it and asked about it. When Aunt Susan went to the kitchen for dessert, he picked it up. Inside were copies of her credit card statements showing luxury purchases on days she'd called in sick, plus emails where she'd badmouthed him to colleagues. Not enough to destroy her completely, just enough to damage her promotion chances. I watched his face on the camera feed, satisfaction blooming as his expression changed from curiosity to concern to fury. His face changed as he read. When Aunt Susan returned, he made an excuse about an emergency and left quickly. Her scream of rage echoed through the house when she saw the open envelope. She burst into my room, accusing me of sabotaging her. I put on my most innocent face and asked what was wrong. She couldn't prove I'd done anything deliberately. Her frustration was palpable, her suspicions unable to find purchase against my carefully constructed innocence. The next day, she didn't get the promotion. Furious, she demanded 80% of my paycheck and daily house cleaning. I agreed with fake tears. When my parents called that weekend and I tried to explain, they told me to stop being dramatic and be grateful. That's when I decided it was time for phase 4. Their continued dismissal of my situation hardened my resolve, turning what might have been simple self-protection into something more calculated. I compiled all my evidence, videos, financial records, nasty texts about my parents, and prepared 3 packages. One for my parents, one for Aunt Susan's workplace, and one as insurance. Each package was carefully curated, containing just enough evidence to be devastating without revealing my full hand. I called my parents when Aunt Susan was at work, insisting I needed to talk about something important. I emailed them the first package while we were on the phone. I heard their shocked gasps as they opened the files. For once, they were speechless. The moment of stunned silence was deeply satisfying, a small payback for all the times they had refused to listen. There's more, I told them calmly. And if you don't help me get out of here, Aunt Susan's boss will receive his package tomorrow. My parents started yelling about family loyalty, but they knew this was serious. I explained my terms, move back home, an apology for abandoning me, and confront Aunt Susan about her behavior. They reluctantly agreed, their resistance crumbling under the weight of the evidence I had collected. My mom drove up the next day. Aunt Susan came home early and found us packing. She screamed about ungrateful brats and threatened to call the police about the cameras. That's when I calmly showed her the third package, evidence of strange men in a house with a minor, financial fraud, and workplace misconduct. Her threats transformed into stammering excuses, her power over me evaporating before my eyes. You can call the police, I said quietly, but then I'll have to show them all of this. The look on her face was priceless. For the first time, she saw me not as a pushover kid, but as someone who had been playing her. My mom stood shocked at both the evidence and my transformation. The air in the room seemed to shift, the balance of power irrevocably altered. As we drove away, my mom kept glancing nervously at me in the rearview mirror, asking if I'd planned this from the beginning. I just smiled. The game wasn't over. My parents still didn't understand their betrayal was just as bad as Aunt Susan's. They thought bringing me home was the end. They had no idea phase 5 was just beginning. Their relief was premature, their guilt only beginning to take shape. Phase 5, make them all pay. Not just Aunt Susan, but my parents too. They had sent me away, chosen their careers over me, and never listened when I needed them. The wounds they had inflicted ran deep, deeper than they could possibly understand. I spent the first week home playing the traumatized victim, crying randomly, jumping at loud noises, picking at food. My parents walked on eggshells, whispering when they thought I couldn't hear. She needs therapy, my mom said. She needs time, my other parent argued. She'll bounce back. Their concern seemed genuine, but it was too little, too late, like offering a bandage for an amputation. They were both wrong. What I needed was access to their computers, phones, and financial information. Their guilt made it easy. Each teardrop was a key, unlocking doors they would otherwise keep closed. I started small, installing a keylogger on my mom's laptop, memorizing my other parents' phone passcode, finding tax returns in the office filing cabinet. I discovered my mom's secret email correspondence with Robert from work. I found my other parents' hidden poker app with thousands in losses. Each secret was ammunition, each discovery another link in the chain I was forging. At school, I was the quiet kid back after a family emergency. Teachers gave me extensions. The counselor had check-ins that I navigated carefully, damaged but improving, not so broken they'd send me to a real therapist who might see through me. I crafted my persona with care, a mask designed to elicit sympathy while concealing my true intentions. Meanwhile, Aunt Susan faced charges for financial fraud. My parents thought that was justice, completely clueless about what was coming. They believed the story was ending, unaware that it was merely shifting to a new chapter with them as the central characters. My opportunity came when they announced a weekend work retreat. They hesitated, worried about leaving me alone so soon after the incident. I'll be fine, I assured them. Jessica from math invited me for a sleepover. The lie slipped easily from my lips, smooth as silk and just as convincing. There was no Jessica. There was no sleepover. There was just me alone for 48 hours. As soon as they left, I got to work, sending inappropriate messages from my mom's work email to her boss, using my other parents' phone to cancel client meetings, scheduling large charity donations from their joint account for the following month. Each action was calculated, designed to cause maximum disruption with minimum evidence of tampering. The real target was still Aunt Susan. Out on bail awaiting trial, her reputation in tatters, but I wanted more. I created a fake email from her lawyer, sending messages to all her friends detailing her confession to crimes she hadn't even committed, making it sound like she was blaming them. The isolation I crafted for her was a mirror of what I had felt, abandoned by those who should have protected me. When my parents returned Sunday evening, I was curled up with a book, the perfect picture of recovery. They had no idea what was coming. Their smiles of relief would soon turn to grimaces of confusion and fear. Over the next weeks, chaos unfolded. My mom was called to HR about inappropriate communications. My other parents' clients were angry about canceled meetings. Their bank called about unusual donations. They were confused, stressed, arguing late into the night while I listened, smiling in the darkness. Their world was unraveling thread by thread, and I held the spool. Someone must have hacked our accounts, they insisted, changing all passwords, not realizing I was watching every move. Their paranoia grew daily, their trust in each other eroding as suspicions multiplied. When Aunt Susan's preliminary hearing approached, I sent an anonymous package to the prosecutor with additional financial documents showing my parents had known about some of her schemes. The morning of the hearing, we sat in court, my parents beside me like protective bookends. When the prosecutor mentioned new evidence implicating additional parties, specifically my parents, they stiffened. I kept my eyes down, playing the confused child. Inside, I was savoring their discomfort, the taste of retribution sweet on my tongue. The judge called a recess. In the hallway, my parents argued. "Did you know about this?" My mom finally asked me, voice breaking. I looked up with innocent eyes. About what? My performance was flawless, a masterclass in feigned innocence. The hearing was postponed. We drove home in silence. My parents were now under investigation too. They hired expensive lawyers. Their accounts were frozen. Aunt Susan started telling authorities my parents were the masterminds. I watched with quiet satisfaction, documenting everything in my journal. The web I had woven was complex and beautiful, catching all who had wronged me. Sometimes I wondered if I was going too far, but then I'd remember the year with Aunt Susan, how she'd manipulated me, used me, made me feel worthless. I'd remember how my parents had abandoned me. No. They deserved this. The flickering moments of doubt were always extinguished by the memory of their betrayal. My mom started drinking wine every afternoon. My other parents spent nights at a hotel. They thought I was coping well because I kept my grades up and joined debate team. They were too wrapped up in their problems to notice I was thriving on their destruction. My success became another form of revenge, proof that they had nearly destroyed something valuable. Then my mom found my journal under my mattress. She came into my room holding it, face white, hands shaking. "What is this?" she whispered. "Please tell me this isn't real." The moment I had both dreaded and anticipated had arrived, the final confrontation, the unveiling of the truth. I could have lied, said it was creative writing to process trauma. But looking at her broken expression, I decided it was time for the final phase, truth. The moment called for honesty, for removing the last barrier between us. "You sent me away," I said simply. "You chose your careers over me, and when I needed you most, you didn't listen." The words hung in the air, unadorned and unavoidable. She sank onto my bed, flipping through pages of my detailed plans. "You did all this? The emails, the donations, the investigation?" I nodded, watching her process the enormity of what I had accomplished. "You're just a child," she said, but her voice held fear. She was finally seeing me clearly. The realization in her eyes was its own reward, confirmation that she understood at last. "I stopped being a child the day you left me with her," I replied. The statement was simple but loaded with truth, an indictment she could not refute. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice small and uncertain. I smiled. Phase 5 was complete, but I hadn't planned a Phase 6. "I think I'll take a vacation," I said casually. "I've earned it, don't you think?" The ball was in her court now, my future a blank page waiting to be written. She nodded quickly, probably hoping I'd disappear from her life again, but on my terms, not hers. Relief and fear mingled in her expression, creating something almost like respect. 3 months later, I was on a beach in Florida. My phone buzzed with a text from Casey, my only real friend who knew nothing about what I'd done. "How's the vacation going?" she asked. I sent a beach selfie, sunglasses hiding the coldness in my eyes. The sun was warm on my skin, but something inside me remained frozen, untouched by the tropical heat. This wasn't just a vacation. This was me figuring out Phase 6. My revenge had been perfect. My parents lost their jobs after I sent evidence of financial improprieties to their bosses. Their social standing crumbled when friends discovered they'd abandoned their child. And Aunt Susan wouldn't be hurting any more children after the recordings I'd made. The wreckage I had created was comprehensive, a complete dismantling of 3 lives. But something felt unfinished. They had all paid, but they didn't understand what they'd created when they broke me. The emptiness I had expected to be filled by revenge remained, a hollow space where closure should have been. My laptop pinged with an email from my mother, the first contact since our confrontation. The subject, "Please." The message, "Please come home. We need to talk. We can fix this." The desperation was evident in every word, a drowning person clutching at straws. I laughed out loud. "Fix this?" There was no fixing what had been done to me, but her email gave me an idea. Perhaps there was a way to transform destruction into something more productive, to build something from the ashes I had created. 2 weeks later, I was back in my hometown, in a small apartment, my fortress. I agreed to meet my mother for coffee. When I arrived, I found not just her, but my other parent and Aunt Karen too. A family reunion. How touching. The cafe buzzing around us provided the perfect public setting, ensuring they would maintain composure. They all looked terrible, aged years and months. They took turns trying to convince me to stop whatever I was doing, apologizing, making excuses, blaming each other. I smiled and listened, savoring each desperate word. The power dynamics had completely reversed, their need for forgiveness putting me firmly in control. Little did they know I wasn't actively doing anything anymore. Their guilt and fear were doing all the work. The machinery of destruction I had set in motion now ran on its own, self-sustaining and efficient. I forgive you, I said finally, watching hope light up their faces like starving people offered food. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. The careful wording was deliberate, offering enough to keep them engaged without promising any real absolution. I laid out my terms: college tuition payment, connections for a good internship, and telling the entire family the truth about leaving me with Aunt Susan. They agreed quickly, thinking they were getting off easy. Their relief was almost tangible, their eagerness to comply almost pitiful. Little did they know, Phase 6 wasn't about more revenge. It was about using them to build my future while they lived in fear of what else I might do. Their resources would become the foundation of my independence, a fitting form of reparation. Aunt Susan called a week later, voice small and frightened, nothing like her authoritarian tone when I lived with her. The police came by again, she said. Someone keeps reporting me for things I didn't do. Her voice trembled with anxiety, her former confidence completely erased. I made sympathetic noises while smiling. The anonymous tips I'd been sending weren't enough for arrest, just enough to keep her paranoid and under scrutiny, to make her feel what I felt, always watched, always judged, never safe. The psychological torment was more effective than any legal punishment could have been. That's terrible, I told her. Maybe you should move away. Start fresh somewhere else. She took my advice, selling her house at a loss and moving to another state. Her flight was confirmation of my victory, proof that I had become the architect of her reality. By Christmas, I had everything I wanted: a good internship, tuition paid, and a family walking on eggshells around me. At my grandparents' holiday dinner, I watched my mother nervously explain to everyone why she'd left me behind years ago. Her hands trembled as she spoke, her voice catching on certain words. We thought it would be better for Daisy to have a stable environment while we sorted out our work situations, she said, not meeting anyone's eyes. My grandfather's expression darkened with each word, his disappointment palpable. My grandmother kept glancing between me and my mother, connecting dots she should have seen years ago. The younger cousins were oblivious, but the adults in the room shifted uncomfortably, the festive atmosphere tainted by ugly truths. The Christmas tree lights cast colored shadows across the room, making everyone look slightly unreal. I sat quietly, sipping hot chocolate and accepting sympathetic pats on the shoulder from relatives who suddenly saw me differently. No one quite knew what to say to me now. The truth had transformed me from the quiet, agreeable niece into something more complicated, a victim, a survivor, perhaps something else entirely that they couldn't categorize. Their discomfort was its own gift, wrapped in awkward silences and overly bright smiles. The ritual of public confession was satisfying, forcing her to acknowledge her failure before those whose opinions she valued. You've changed, my grandmother told me privately, eyes searching mine. There's something different about you. Her perception was keen, recognizing the transformation even if she couldn't identify its nature. I smiled. I grew up. Those 3 words contained multitudes, an entire history of pain and adaptation, of survival and rebirth. In January, I started my internship. My boss, Jordan, was impressed with my work ethic and attention to detail, not knowing those skills were honed planning elaborate revenge schemes, documenting every slight until I had enough ammunition to destroy my family. The tools forged in darkness now served me in the light, my trauma transformed into talent. You're going to go far, she told me. I believed her. For the first time, I was looking forward instead of backward, but that didn't mean I'd forgotten. The past was not erased, merely incorporated into my new identity, fuel for my ambition. Every few weeks, I'd send one of my family members a small reminder that I was watching, a photo of their new office, a copy of a private calendar, a forgotten bracelet. Nothing threatening, nothing explicit, just enough to keep them wondering what I might do next, to make sure they never felt completely safe. The maintenance of fear required only minimal effort, like tending a garden that largely grew on its own. By summer, I had been promoted. I had my own apartment, money, and life. The control I'd fought for was finally mine. Casey visited in July, marveling at how well I was doing. I don't get it, she said over dinner at a nice restaurant. A year ago, you were barely functioning, and now look at you. Her amazement was genuine, her perspective limited by her own normal upbringing. I shrugged. I found my motivation. The understatement made me smile inwardly, the vastness of what remained unsaid hanging between us. What I didn't tell her was that my family was still waiting for the other shoe to drop. They didn't understand that keeping them afraid was better than any additional revenge. Their imagination of what I might do was far worse than anything I would actually do. Fear was the perfect prison, one they had built themselves. In August, I got a letter from Aunt Susan. She was sick, cancer. She wanted to make amends before it was too late. I read the letter twice, then filed it with my other insurance. No response needed. Let her face mortality with the same uncertainty she'd forced on me. Her illness evoked no sympathy, only a cold acknowledgement that some justice occurred naturally. My mother called on my birthday in September. We're having a family dinner. Will you come? I agreed, curious to see them all together again. The invitation was a test, one I decided to accept, if only to observe the results of my handiwork. When I arrived, everyone was there, parents, grandparents, with cake, presents, balloons. A perfect family celebration to outside eyes. The facade was impressive, the effort they put into maintaining appearances almost touching. During dinner, my parents said carefully, "We want you to know that we're all very proud of how well you're doing." I smiled. They still didn't get it. They thought I'd moved on, completely blind to the fact that every success I achieved was another form of revenge, showing them what they'd almost destroyed. Each accomplishment was both genuine progress and a silent rebuke, a dual purpose they would never fully comprehend. "Thank you," I said sweetly. "I couldn't have done it without you." They looked relieved, taking my words as forgiveness rather than the accusation they were. The double meaning was lost on them, another layer of satisfaction for me alone. As I blew out the candles, I made a wish, not for more revenge, but for strength to keep building my life while they remained trapped in the prison of fear I'd created. The future stretched before me, unbounded by their expectations or limitations. I had broken free in the most definitive way possible, by breaking them first. That night, as I drove back to my apartment, I thought about the voicemail from yesterday, my parents crying so hard their words were unintelligible. Perhaps they had finally realized the full extent of what they had done, not just to me but to themselves. Perhaps they were mourning the family we could have been, or the people they could have become if they had made different choices. Or perhaps they were simply afraid of what tomorrow might bring, what new punishment I might have devised while they slept. I saved the voicemail, though I'm not sure why. Maybe as evidence. Maybe as a reminder. Maybe someday I'll play it and feel something, satisfaction, pity, grief. But for now, I feel nothing but a profound sense of completion, as if a circle has finally closed. Phase 6 wasn't about destroying them further. It was about thriving while they withered. And from the looks on their faces as I opened my presents, it was working perfectly. Their smiles were strained, their laughter hollow, their eyes constantly checking my expression for any sign of what might come next. They would never know peace again. And I would never need revenge again. The scales had finally balanced.